the newsagents.
It's the day after Rishi Sunak's big pre-election speech trying to draw the dividing line between him and Keir Starmer and that Labour represents a danger going forward. Well, today on the newsagents, we have a serving cabinet minister in the studio who wants to talk about that and wider issues too.
We're going to hear why Labour are not really doing as well as everyone thinks they are, and why the Tories actually have every chance of winning the next election. Does he really believe that? Does his party really believe that? And if so, why are so many leaving in their droves? Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily, and I'm pleased to say that we're welcoming into Newsagents HQ a cabinet minister today. He is the Secretary of State for Wales, David TC Davies. And there's so much to talk to you about, David, not least Rishi Sunak's speech yesterday and what you made of that, and a sense amongst your colleagues of what they're feeling going into this election following the recent defections and indeed people stepping down. But I want to start with you where we ended last week, which was in Wales itself, in Port Talbot, at the steelworks owned by Tata that are actually going to shut down. Because this is going to be a moment, not just for Wales, but for the whole of the UK, which is essentially the end of our ability to make steel. And we've heard very little from Tata, the company itself, up till now. I'd be interested to know what the government thinks about this decision.
You know, obviously it's devastating news for Talbot, for those who work in Tata itself and for the wider region. And I think we have to make clear this wasn't a government decision. The government didn't want this to happen. Tata came to us and said they were going to pull out completely of making steel in Wales, and that would have cost 8,000 jobs. So we were looking at a situation where we'd have lost 8,000 jobs, all steel making in Wales, and we'd have lost thousands more in the supply chain. So, you know, we were in a very, very difficult situation with this, and we've come up with something that is going to save 5,000 jobs and keep steel being made.
How do you think that Tata themselves have handled this? I mean, we understand that they are threatening to reduce redundancy packages for workers who vote for strike action.
Well, that's not my understanding of it, but clearly you'd have to talk to them. No, you'd have to talk to them. My understanding is that at the moment they're looking to offer a voluntary redundancy package between now and July, which is more generous than standard redundancy payments, and that they will also enable people working in parts of the plant which are going to operate anyway, which will continue operating, to take early retirement or voluntary redundancy, so that people who are working on the blast furnace itself can actually move over there. So when this announcement was first made in September, we were expecting the redundancies to start happening now. At the moment, we're not expecting to see any compulsory redundancies until September.
Look, we've been here a number of times before where big foreign investors decide, you know what, we're pulling out or we're going to change the centre of our manufacturing. And government finds a way of perhaps making it a bit easier for them to stay, whether it be subsidies or whatever it happens to be. Was that not an option?
Well, we looked at every option, but Tata said to us very clearly they were losing over £1 million a day on this. So there was no option that was going to keep them there. No company is going to take losses like that for any length of time, are they? I mean, we've got to be realistic about this. And I went over to Mumbai and spoke to the head of Tata Holdings, not just Tata Steel, but Tata Holdings. He was all over this, and he was very clear. He said there is no future for making steel in a blast furnace that is going to lose over £1 million a day. They just are not going to be persuaded by it.
Thatcher and coal, essentially? I mean, is that where you think
well, Emily, I don't want to go back in time. I mean, obviously I'm from Wales myself and I remember the miners' strike. We could do a separate programme on it. But what I will say is this, that we do not want a situation where we see not just large numbers of people losing their jobs, but also a wider impact on the community. So the plan for the arc furnace is going to save 5,000 jobs and thousands more in the supply chain. But at no time have I ever suggested that this is good for the area. You know, it is going to mean 2,800 directly lose their jobs and several thousand more in the supply chain. So that's why the board which I chair is there. We're there to support people through this. We've got £100 million. We're going to make sure that anyone who loses their job and wants to stay in the workplace, so anyone who's not taking retirement, is able to get any kind of training they want to find other well-paid work. We're already talking to employers about what they might want, and there are vacancies coming through. But also the town of Port Talbot itself needs support. And so our plan there is we've allocated Freeport status to Port Talbot. We're looking to work with ABP and other major companies to help develop a floating offshore wind industry, which in the longer term could bring a lot of benefits. And of course the arc furnace itself is a £1.2 billion investment. But at no time do I run away from the fact this is going to be 2,800 people losing their jobs. That's a terrible, terrible thing.
Minister, I mean, is the best way to characterise this that you've made the best of a bad job? I mean...
Well, we made the best of it. Yes, I mean, we made the best of a very difficult situation, which we did not, at the end of the day, we did not ask Tata to make this decision. And I get a bit frustrated because Labour are going around saying this is a bad deal, we can save the jobs. They couldn't do it. At no time have they gone along to Tata with an alternative costed proposal and said, if you keep the jobs, we'll give you this. At no time has that happened. And Tata have been very clear that they're not going to accept any alternative to it. This is the only deal in town.
You mentioned Labour. I want to raise something else with you, which is the suggestion that you filmed a video attacking Labour plans to expand the Senedd from your ministerial office, and that was a breach of the ministerial code because you were using government offices for party political purposes.
Well, I mean, look, I came here to talk about Tata. To be honest with you, there were big demonstrations going on that day, and I'll deal with that separately. But if Labour want to draw attention to the fact that at a moment when let me go back to Tata, which is what you asked me about. We've put in £80 million to the transition board. We've allocated money for FlowMist, so that's to develop the infrastructure so that we can build floating offshore wind turbines in Port Talbot. We've put in place a towns fund. We've put a lot of money together to support the people and businesses and the community of Port Talbot. We haven't had a penny from the Welsh Government for this. And they're complaining about me making a video where they decided on that afternoon to spend £120 million on creating extra politicians. And we're spending significant amounts of money trying to protect Port Talbot and provide money to steelworkers. And they're going on about whether or not it should have been filmed in an office. So let's talk about the fact that 2,800 people are losing their jobs and aren't going to get support from this government.
And David, when you look at this more widely, and you've been an MP, Monmouth 2005, the feeling is that Wales have given up on the Tories. I mean, you had a very good result, general election-wise, in 2019. Mm-hmm. The current prediction for Wales is that from those 14 seats, you might be left with 2. I know you're sitting on a majority of 10,000. What is your response? I mean, how can you bring the Tories back to Wales?
What I want to do is say to you, right? These are all. I mean, first of all, I accept these polls are all very bad, and yet the Police and Crime Commissioner elections across England and Wales, we ended up with more PCCs than Labour. So how do you explain that disparity? Let me just say this: I go out canvassing every week, every single Saturday, right? And when I'm out on the doorstep, people are raising with me. First of all, the health service is in a worse state. We've got longer waiting lists in Wales. We've got lower educational standards in Wales, and that is entirely the fault of the Welsh Labour government, which we've had for 25 years. We got daft ideas like 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, £120 million being spent on extra politicians.
They've been reversed now, haven't they?
No, they haven't. No, what they did, they made a big announcement on the same day they were dealing with news about Fawn and accepting £200,000 from somebody who was convicted of waste offences. They sort of said that they were going to look at backtracking a bit and giving more powers back to the councils. That was already in case anyway, as far as I can see. So they haven't backtracked at all. They've spent £30 million so far on new 20-mile-an-hour signs. And people are really annoyed about this. Now, I'm not saying there's any great love for the Conservative government. There isn't any great love for the Labour government. And I'm really up for this election. And I'm going to hold Labour to account for their record. You are
standing?
Oh, God, yeah, I'm definitely standing.
You're not standing for Labour.
Oh,
You're not
must be joking. You must be joking. Absolutely.
Do you understand why so many of your colleagues don't want to fight the next election or seem to be flipping to the other side?
Some people, well, first of all, there are quite a lot who just want to stand down. Not everyone enjoys being an MP. I personally do like the job. It is a job and it's a lot of work, but I can tell you, I can't speak for what other people have done, right? But I enjoy going out and campaigning, and I'm campaigning every single week. You should come down, Emily. Come and actually talk to people in Wales and see what they've got to say about the fact they've had 25 years of Welsh Labour government that has given them lower educational standards, lower health standards, longer waiting lists, that is wasting money left, right and centre, and see what people think.
Do you think you're going to prove everyone right? Because, I mean, why would the polls say that you're going to have virtual wipeout in Wales if you're hearing such different messages?
Why are the polls saying that we're completely wiped out and finished, and yet we end up with more police and crime commissioners than Labour do?
Why do you think?
I genuinely don't know. I mean, I would suggest the polls must be missing something, right?
But the polls were right, sort of broadly, for kind of England, given what happened in the local council elections, apart from,
what about the PCCs?
So you don't think the situation is as bad? I'm just interested in your assessment of where you think the party is right now, because
I think I'm sure all the polls can't be wrong about, and people are saying what they're saying, but when people are voting, they're obviously doing something slightly different. I think we can accept that, can't we?
Well, I don't know. It's just that you lost half the seats you fought in, more or less, in the local council elections.
My coffee while I think about
it. Yeah, go on. You have a sip of coffee. That will give with a bit of sugar in it, will give you kind of energy drive.
You can go through the numbers.
Yeah, I'll go through the numbers.
But it was about 900.
It's not great. Yeah. I mean, I agree. Look, you beat me up on this. The polls are not very good. But when I go out canvassing, I get a slightly different picture, and I get a sense of frustration as much about what Labour are doing in Wales as about what the Conservative government's doing in England. And I suppose the difference is that people are aware, not everyone is, but people are more and more aware now in Wales. We've had 25 years of a Labour government. And what that Labour government is delivering in Wales is what a Labour government would deliver in the rest of the United Kingdom if they're elected. And I just ask you, I mean, on any independent basis, they're doing a worse job on the areas where they've got control. We have got longer waiting lists. We have lower educational standards. The OECD have said that themselves. The standards in schools are going down. Now, they can't blame this on money because they're getting 20% more per head to spend on these services than what is being spent in England. And I think one of the problems is the national media, with all due respect, don't really come along and have a look at what is going on in the one corner of the United Kingdom where we've had 25 years.
I don't think you can blame us for that. We've been in Wales three times in the last month, actually.
I'm not blaming any of it on you, but you must admit the Welsh Labour government doesn't seem to get the, if you like, the recognition for what it's doing at the moment.
You raised a moment ago about Vaughan Gething and £200,000 received, and plenty of allegations around all of that. And obviously the Conservatives have, understandably, you're trying to make kind of hay with it. What about Frank Hester giving the Tory party 10 million and with another 5 million apparently in the works? Is that okay, given what he said about Diane Abbott?
Well, I mean, there is a difference, isn't there? We didn't know that he made these comments, so he made it at a private meeting. Somebody who has got some kind of claim against him.
But now that you do know what he said.
Well, obviously, I totally deprecate those comments. But what I just bring it back, since Labour made the big issue about Frank Hester, Vaughan Gething knew what the deal was with this company. He knew that the director had been convicted twice, and yet he was happy to take £200,000. Now, I think there's another question, which is that the company that made the donation had received £400,000 in a loan from a government-backed bank, a bank that was run by, ultimately, the Welsh taxpayer. Now, just look, this is an important question. If a company needs to borrow £400,000 from a government-backed bank, why is it then, within a few months, in a position to hand over £200,000 in cash, practically, as a donation? This is a reasonable question.
OK, you've raised the question. We will put that to him. But let me put to you the fact that you've received 10 million. There is another 5 million, apparently, that he has donated, following his comments, which you say you absolutely deprecate. If you deprecate them, send the 5 million back.
Well, it's not for me to decide
where
donations come from.
What would you want to do? What do you think?
Well, I've just said I don't agree with the comments made whatsoever.
But do you think you should take the money?
Well, I'm not aware of it, so you'll have to ask somebody else about that. I am not aware of it, but I think Frank Hester has actually apologised for the comments he made. I would hope that he would also want to distance himself from any hurt he's caused. And I think he did try to ring Diane Abbott to apologise.
Why do you think the Tories have had 3 defections in weeks? Well, you had, I guess, Blackpool South has been a newly gained seat for Labour, and you've had 2 Tory defections. What do you make of Natalie Ali going over? Is she a loss?
Well, it's a bit of a surprise because, I would say I'm on the sort of centre-right of the Conservative Party, and she was sort of way to the right of me. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out. We'll have to wait and see. Are you
surprised by the comments which she denies to Robert Buckland when her husband got charged.
But I wasn't there when that happened, so I can't really say. I mean, Robert is a predecessor of mine, and I know him to be a very
You'd assume
honest...
he was telling the truth?
Oh, yes, I would 100% assume Robert's telling the truth, yes.
So you'd assume she isn't then?
Well, I'm not going to come on here and say that, but I'm 100% certain Robert Buckland is a very, very truthful sort of person.
So you're saying good riddance then to her?
Well, I think we'll get by without her, yes. I'm not saying good riddance to anyone, but at the end of the day, she's got some very right-wing views, and I'm quite surprised to see her sitting on the Labour benches. But if they're happy with that, I suppose it's up to them.
I mean, do you think that... I mean, Rishi Sunak made a big speech yesterday setting out the sort of natural course for the election with this sort of Labour represents a danger and only the Conservatives can be trusted with safety. That was exactly what John Major tried in 97 with New Labour, New Danger and the Demon Eyes and all the rest of it. And it just didn't resonate with the British public.
Look, John, I'm living this, right? I live in Wales. I've had 25 years of a Labour government. So I'm going out there and saying, this isn't something we're making up. If you have any doubts about what a Labour government would look like, you just have to cross the border, cross over into Wales, and you can see it for yourself.
Do you think Keir Starmer is scary?
I don't think he's scary, but he's said that the policies being pursued by Labour in Wales are a blueprint for the rest of the United Kingdom. These are his words. So the sort of policies we've seen, with the 20-mile-an-hour limits, lower standards in health, and we have lower educational standards. Our education standards are going down. In England, they're going up. This is a blueprint for the rest of the United Kingdom. We don't have a blanket 20-mile-an-hour on every single road and motorway. We've got them on all 30-mile-an-hour roads. All 30-mile-an-hour roads are down to 20 miles an hour.
I guess none of that explains...
This is a blueprint for the UK, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you feel that you're screaming this until you're... Well, okay, agriculture is a great example because you've got the Labour Party literally in the sort of last 24 hours saying we've got farmers on our side now because of everything that's happened to agriculture and to farming since the Brexit vote, since the treatment by the Conservative government, since the isolation that many have felt economically. Why are farmers even going to Labour?
Well, they're not in Wales. They're protesting outside the Senedd because they've been told that 10% of their land has to be put aside for growing trees and another 10% of their land has to be put aside for other wildlife schemes, which when you go through the documents looks like they have to dig out scrapes and ponds.
Should Rishi Sunak spend the rest of his time in office speaking about Wales?
No, I'll do that for him. I'm quite happy to. He's got every right, has he not, to point out that in one part of the United Kingdom we've had a Labour government for 25 years. They failed on health, failed on education, they failed motorists. Do you know we're not having any new roads being built?
I guess that's
no new roads being built in Wales, right? No new roads being built.
Why do they keep voting for Labour then?
I don't know, but I'm not sure that they will permanently. I think once people are beginning to get the message now that this is what a Labour government stands for, and that's why I'm out campaigning every week.
Minister, do you really believe that you can win the next general election?
Yes, I absolutely do. I genuinely.
Do you think you will?
I
don't know whether we will. I never like to predict it. No, the Conservatives. I never like to make predictions, but I definitely think we can. I know what you're going to say. Polls 10, 20, 30% behind.
Well, no, we've seen real votes as well. I mean, we've seen real votes in polling stations.
I know you're meant to ask me the questions, right? But how do you explain the Police and Crime Commissioner?
But that's all you've got. How is it that even with somebody like Andy Street... People like Andy Street, who've got an amazing track record, they can't do the Tory thing again. It's the wrong one.
All I'm saying is it's a slightly more mixed picture, perhaps.
Yeah.
And because I accept the polls are very bad, and then I look at the PCCs and I think, well, that's not quite so bad. Council election's bad. But
so
not all bad. It's mixed,
are you taking that message to your party? Because in a way, that's the big thing for you, isn't it? Your own colleagues, your MPs are the ones losing faith at the moment. You've seen people like, the plotters after the local election saying, well, we've just given up, we're going to the pub. You've seen defections. You've seen people standing down. If it's all to play for, and if there's this great vote for the police and crime commissioners, why aren't your own colleagues seeing this in the party?
I don't know. I'm not staking it all in police and crime commissioners. I'm just saying...
You are a bit.
No, I'm not, because I'm quite happy to admit the polls are bad, right? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it must be a bit more mixed than you're suggesting. My colleagues well, I'll tell you my colleagues should do. Come down to South Wales and come out with me on a Saturday.
All right,
that's what they should do. If they're losing heart, don't go to the pub. I'm out every Saturday, 10 till 12, and I'll show you what a Labour government looks like.
Right, Secretary of State,
what things are really like on the doorstep.
Rishi Sunak in his speech.
Open invite.
Secretary of State, Rishi Sunak in his speech yesterday talked about how, we're proud of our past 14 years and we need to kind of look back on that. And I think past 14 years, Didn't we have Liz Truss and people's mortgages going through the roofs and the near collapse of the pension industry? Didn't we have Partygate? Didn't we have all those MPs being forced to resign and recall petitions? Didn't we have austerity? Didn't we have 3 prime ministers in 1 year? I mean, it's a pretty mixed picture to look back over these 14 years, isn't it?
It's been a pretty tricky 14 years, right? I mean, we came in on the brink of what I think Gordon Brown described as an almost worldwide economic collapse.
Well, that was him. I mean, he was in power.
It was a difficult financial situation.
It's always difficult. I mean, that's what being Prime Minister is.
Come on, 2007-8, that was even more difficult than the normal difficult ones, right? I mean, it's not been easy, right? The last 14 years, especially the last couple of years, we had. I mean, I've been an MP for nearly 20 years. I've never seen anything like this last 5 or 6 years. We had the challenge of Brexit. It was challenging. We had COVID, obviously, the impact of the war in Ukraine. I think
we should say when you say the challenge of Brexit, you were a very forceful Brexiteer.
Absolutely. But people voted for it, and then we discovered that it was going to be that a lot of people didn't want it to happen. A lot of people who should have respected that vote, whether they're in the Lords or in some cases the civil service.
So the problem with Brexit was the Remainers, was it, or what?
Well, you look at the 2017 election. Labour went out there saying we are going to respect the Brexit vote, and then as soon as they got back in and there was a hung parliament, they did everything they could to frustrate it. So it was very, very difficult. Those 2 years were very difficult, and then we dealt with that in 2019, but then immediately we got hit with the COVID situation.
Can I just on one thing? Sorry, just on. Because we've spoken much more in this interview than I ever thought we would about police and crime commissioners. Weren't the results in Wales that there were 4 elections, 1 was won by Plaid, 3 were won by Labour, the Tories were second in all 4?
Yes, that's right, yeah. But I'm talking about England and Wales. You're asking me about across the whole of the UK, yeah.
So that kind of rather undermines your argument, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't, because I'm not staking an argument on PCC. I'm just saying to you, you can't say it's all bad when across England and Wales together, right, we ended up with more police and crime commissioners than Labour.
That sounds like what Andrew Mitchell said. He said we've either won or we've nearly won. You've nearly won.
Yes. I mean, we never win normally. I don't think we normally come second everywhere in Wales. But I'm not staking it on PCCs. I'm just suggesting to you that there must be more to it than opinion polls that say we're finished, nobody's ever going to vote Conservative, 10, 20, 30% behind, when we ended up with more PCCs.
Just to end.
Actually, we had slightly fewer votes than Labour as well. So
Emily and I both want to ask the same question.
Yeah, we do. And it's the first time we've had you in the seat. You've been part of the British Transport Police, right?
Yes,
Special Constable. Yeah. When you hear a colleague like Suella Braverman talking about the hate marches, and I'm looking particularly at what's happened over the Gaza protests in Israel, do you think she's right? Do you think it has turned into a sort of a place of hate?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because if you're a police officer, you there are limited numbers of police officers trying to do a very difficult job, and with many different jobs to do. And I think the police are trying to keep the peace. And it's not always easy to do everything as you'd want. I mean, there are many thousands of people coming out, and so often with sadly sometimes with anti-Semitic posters, and it is very difficult for a limited number of police officers to sort of go in there and stop that.
Do you think the protesters have had too much leeway?
The protesters, the more reasonable ones, need to ask themselves whether it's helping their cause when other people on their marches are going along with anti-Semitic posters or posters with depicting swastikas or referencing Zionism, when in actual fact I think many of them, if not most of them, simply want to make a point about lives being lost in Palestine. And it's a case sometimes of who do you want to be associated with. I know I was on one a very peaceful sort of Brexit open air meeting, and somebody came along and expressed a racist view. And before I'd even had the chance to say or do anything, other people had rounded on them and told them in no uncertain terms to get lost, and rather more firmly than that, because we didn't want anything to do with people doing that, because obviously that person was completely wrong and out of order, but we would not want to be associated with people with extremist views. And that, I think, is a lesson that perhaps some people protesting for Palestine might want to take.
David Davies, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think it's time for a little bit of disclosure here. When we heard David Davies start talk about the police commissioner results in Wales, I panicked. I had a psephological panic because I couldn't remember those victories. I knew that I'd been down a whole list of places that the Tories had one. I know that we'd spoken about it extensively on our episode after the May local elections, and I couldn't remember that they'd done so well, and I was really embarrassed about forgetting that they'd had all these incredible, amazing victories in Wales. The reason for that, as you made so patently clear, was that they hadn't.
I mean, it's one of those things where you think, hang on, I wish I knew. I wish I could remember.
Yeah.
I wish I'd studied this more closely. Yeah. I remember all the big kind of mayoralties. I remember the by-election. I know how many councillors they lost.
Yeah, we all heard about Ben Houchen. Of course, we heard about Ben Houchen and Harlow.
I mean, yeah, and so then you get police and crime commissioners. Oh my God, what are the numbers? What are the numbers?
Quick.
And I've got to say, our producer on the other side of the glass, Gabriel, just sent me a little thing saying, weird, these are the numbers for the police and crime commissioners in Wales. So there you are. As long as the Tories feel they've got something to be...
Second place is a wonderful thing to come, but it definitely isn't a win. I was awake at 4 o'clock this morning, I think because of the dog or the storm. But an hour earlier, Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, had just made that crossing via train from Poland into Kiev. It was unannounced, unexpected as far as we were concerned. And he was there to try and boost support for Ukraine in what has been an incredibly difficult last few months, where they frankly didn't know if America was going to come to the table with that long-promised aid. And Zelensky has since made the case to Antony Blinken that they need 2 air defence batteries to save their second city of Kharkiv. We're going to be joined now by Peter Conradi, who is the Europe editor of the Sunday Times. And as John was saying, always, Peter, with Russia, there seem to be so many tentacles and so many bits of the story to put together. So maybe before we get on to Georgia and Tbilisi and that new legislation that's coming in here, how in peril do you think Kharkiv is right now? And what do you make of this unannounced visit by the US?
I mean, the idea that they could actually take Kharkiv itself, I think it's unlikely. I mean, the Ukrainians are certainly downplaying that danger. Kharkiv is a very big city, population still of about 1.3 million or so. For a period in the past, it was the Ukrainian capital even. So I don't think there is the real danger to Kharkiv itself. I mean, the problem is that the Russians are gradually taking more and more territory between the border and Kharkiv, which is only about sort of 30 miles or so away. They've already got, I think, something like 50 square miles of territory. You've got a mass kind of outflow of people that live in the villages, which are kind of coming under Russian control. I think it's something like 7,500 people have already fled. Plus, there are continuing relentless air attacks on Kharkiv itself. So, in a sense, we don't know what the Russians' aim is. This could just actually be a diversionary tactic to draw Ukrainian forces away from the main front line, which is a little further to the south and to the east.
So when this is happening, how much is this down to Ukrainians making mistakes in their defences, and how much of it is down to the fact that Western aid sort of dried up, particularly from America, when that vote was held up in Congress for so long?
The significance of the holding up of this American aid, both in actual terms and symbolically as sort of representing a wavering in the American commitment, has been enormous. And I mean, there is no doubt that the Ukrainians are being outgunned by the Russians, they're being out-missiled, they're being out everything else. And, this is, it's surprising, I think, that the Russians did choose to strike here. No one really could see this coming. But, in retrospect, why not? It's a way of further stretching the Ukrainian forces, and it's a sign of, the Russian determination just to keep on going, to prepare for their own offensive following the failure of the Ukrainian one. And I think, one should be also talking in this context about the reshuffle that we've had in Moscow in the past few days, which is very significant. I think the firing on Sunday of Sergei Shoigu, who had been defense minister, great mate of Putin's. They used to go mushroom picking together in Siberia, horseback riding, all this kind of stuff. He's out. He's been sort of shunted upstairs to the Security Council. They've replaced him with a guy called Andrei Belousov, who might seem like an unlikely choice in that he's got no military experience whatsoever. He's an economist in his mid-60s. But it's a sign that this guy who's been at the heart of Russian economic opinion, policy making rather, for the past decade or 2 decades, has been brought in. It's part of a kind of an expectation on the Russian side that this war is going to go on, and that you need someone who knows what he's doing in charge of the defense ministry, essentially to put the Russian economy on a permanent war footing.
And meanwhile, Peter, we've got that sense of Russian influence being felt so strongly in Georgia under this foreign influence bill. Just explain to us what that is and why it has now brought protesters, and indeed, to counter that, police, pretty violent clashes, onto the streets of Tbilisi now in Georgia.
Yes, so this foreign influence bill is very significant, sort of symbolically significant, I think. I mean, it's essentially modelled on a law that is already in force in Russia. It's been in force in Russia for a few years now, which is used basically to intimidate, to discredit, and to generally undermine the opposition. And basically what it says is that any media organisation, any non-governmental organisation that receives more than 20% of its funds from abroad is officially designated as being an organisation which is serving the interests of a foreign power. Now, this has been pushed through the Georgian parliament by the ruling party, the rather unfortunately named Georgian Dream, which is turning into the Georgian Nightmare, I think, as far as a lot of Georgians are concerned. The bill has just had its 3rd reading in Parliament this morning. It is passed by an overwhelming majority, which is not surprising because the ruling party has got an overwhelming majority of the seats. It has provoked enormous demonstrations, as you mentioned. Until now, thankfully, the casualties have been minor, number of people injured, relatively small. Things look likely to escalate, I think, in the next few days because the law has been passed. It now needs to go to the president. The president has said that she is going to veto it. Then it comes back to the parliament. All you need is a simple majority. It goes through. And, this is going to cause huge protests at home. And it's really going to undermine Georgia's attempts to join the EU, because the EU has said, basically, if you have this rule in place, you can't join.
Yeah. And just kind of final thought, really. The West imposed the most stringent sanctions on Putin in the wake of the invasion on February the 22nd, 2 years ago. Putin does not look weakened. He still looks like he's able to act with considerable power and authority.
And impunity.
Moscow has not been brought to its knees.
No, that is the tragedy, because, I think the mistake that we often make sitting in London or Paris or Berlin is to think that the West is the world. The West isn't the world. Putin has been trading increasingly with China. He's getting weapons from Iran, from North Korea. What we call the global South these days really doesn't want to be drawn into the thing. Look at India and so on. So no, Putin is in a very strong position, unfortunately. He's just been elected for yet another term. He's 71, but he clearly thinks he's going to be there well into his 80s. And, the mood in the country is, from what I hear from people that talk to me from Moscow or come back from Moscow or whatever, is surprisingly good. So, from a Russian point of view, this could just unfortunately go on and on and on.
On that depressing note, Peter, thanks so much for joining us, Peter Conradi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
OK, now, bear with us on this one. Think Bjorn again, but the political equivalent. It's not ABBA, but it is the Rishi Sunak stand-in. There is a guy who basically is a lookalike. He is a Rishi Sunak lookalike. And he said that actually in the run-up to the election, he's quite happy that lots of work opportunities are coming his way. Except this morning, it all went a bit wrong.
Yeah, this was Northampton. Rishi Sunak lookalike has been hired to do an event as some kind of stunt. Except for the fact that he obviously is so much of a lookalike that a member of the public thought, bloody hell, that's the frigging Prime Minister there, I'm furious, who obviously happened to have an egg with him, and eggs the lookalike. So this poor guy has had his suit ruined for looking like Rishi Sunak.
I mean, it must be an extraordinary thing to have to do to imitate somebody that I guess vast swathes of the public don't really love.
I've been told I look like Robert De Niro. I wonder whether Robert De Niro has ever had adoring fans coming up to him and saying, "You're John Sopel."
Yeah, that John Sopel. Yeah, I had that John Sopel in the back of my movie trailer the other day. Yeah, exactly.
We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.